After sudden loss, our guest has faced decades-long journey through the depths of trauma, grief, and PTSD that would eventually lead to healing, forgiveness, and transformation. Today, Susan shares her story with raw honesty, deep wisdom. She opens up about navigating her life after violent loss, finding the courage to feel vulnerable. She reclaimed her voice without living as a victim. If you've experienced trauma or are supporting someone who has, this episode will offer you guidance and unremarkable hope. So, Susan, thank you so much for being here today and
Thanks for
sharing your
having
story.
me. Thank you.
I want to take us back to Halloween night in 1985, just to give our guests, our listeners, an idea of how horrific and where your story begins.
Sure, absolutely. So in 1985, I was 17 years old. My dad was a Los Angeles police detective based out of North Hollywood, California. Um, and he was the lead detective on a case that was in trial. On Halloween night, the plan that day was that my dad and I had some words the morning that he was getting ready to go to court because I wanted to go to a party and it was a school night. So he said no. And so the plan was that as soon as dad came home and mom came home, I was going to schmooze them into allowing me to go to this party. So the plan was that I would go home after school. My mom would come home. My dad was off picking up my then 6-year-old brother from school. And then he'd come home and we'd figure out Halloween night. That didn't happen. So, my mom did come home and she was getting out of her costume and the phone rang. And so I ran to the phone thinking it was for me anyways. I'm a teenager. Picked up the phone and it was a lady from my brother's school. And all she said was that there was a drive-by shooting and my dad was involved. Nothing more than that. As she finished her sentence, I saw my mom come around the corner and I just handed her the phone immediately. In my gut, I felt like, what is happening? Right. And I watched my mom and I watched her demeanor. I watched her body language and I knew that it was not good. So she got off the phone and she looked at me and said, "We're going to the school." And we got in the car. We didn't speak 2 words to each other all the way there. It's about a 7-minute drive. The way that the school is put together or set up is that there is a parking lot right in the middle of the school. So the kids after school, and this was past 5 o'clock. So the kids are let out on the back side of the school. And so when we got there, we parked in the parking lot and started heading towards the back of the school. And at that point, all I could see was the lights. The sky was lit up because it was dark by now. And I could see all the police units lighting up the sky. And there was an ambulance sitting in the street. My mom and I, from the corner of our eye, saw my dad's truck. So we started to run towards the truck. And as closer as we got to the truck, we saw glass kind of laying around the ground and rounded the corner. And that's where he was, partially covered up. And I watched my mom drop to her knees and just scream. And I stood there in the street. I could not comprehend what I was seeing. And so what I ended up doing is hyper focusing on the ambulance and thinking, why isn't anyone helping him? Because the ambulance is right there. It wasn't too much longer that 2 officers came up and kind of grabbed our arms and pulled us from the scene. They took us into the school, into an office. And at that point, I had no idea where my brother was. I didn't know if he was hurt. I knew nothing. So I sat in the office and my mom got pulled away. It was very chaotic. In my mind, I still couldn't comprehend what I just saw. It was like part of me was saying, nope, that didn't happen. It's like being in a nightmare and you just want to wake up.
Yeah.
Um, And since I wasn't comprehending it and sitting there, I was focused on two ladies that were having a conversation that worked at the school. The one lady said to the other one that my dad was deceased. And that's when it hit me. That's when the sky cracked. And all I wanted to do at that point was run out of that room and run as far from the scene as I could. But my legs would not allow. I literally felt like I was sitting in cement. My legs were heavy, and I think at that point the shock hit me, and I didn't know how to process this. I was just like, all these things were swirling in my head, and I didn't know how to navigate them. My mom came into the room and she said, "I'm sending you with a neighbor." And I was kind of taken aback, because even though I wanted to run out of that room, the other part of me, the child part of me, wanted to be in with my family. I needed to be with my family unit, and instead I'm being sent away. So, I mean, that was difficult in itself. And it gave me kind of this thought of like, I wasn't important in this scenario. It started that mindset process. When I got to the neighbor's house, the poor neighbor had known my family for years and years, and their daughter and I were best friends when we were smaller. And so she was trying to process everything. And here she has his hysterical daughter in her living room. I couldn't even speak. I was so distraught. And all I wanted at that point was my boyfriend. I was dating an older guy. I had been dating for 3 months, and all I wanted was him. And so she called him, but she didn't give him any information, unfortunately, because when he showed up at the door, he said, grab your coat, grab your purse. What hospital is he at? Where's your mom? Where's your brother? Like, just normal things that someone would ask, like, where do I take you? And it couldn't come out of my mouth. Like, I just could not. If I said it, it was real. And I just didn't want to go there. But the more he was insistent, I finally just blurted out the words, "He's gone." And my boyfriend was like, "What do you mean he's gone?" And I said, "He's gone. He's not at a hospital. He's gone." And I watched my 19-year-old boyfriend drop to his knees and start sobbing. And we were two kids that were just trying to navigate all of this. I mean, it was so chaotic in our world. I mean, we just had plans to go to this party and do like normal teenage things. And now this has happened. And, the other side of that is that my street, which was very quiet, it was very quiet in the valley. It just was overtaken by police cars up and down the street and helicopters overhead. Unbeknownst to us, we were a target as well. And so I didn't know at the time. That didn't come out into the trials, but I just went from this normal teenage life to this thing and my dad and I at that point in my life were very, very close. Like, my dad and I were just like, he was my best friend. And the one thing I can say about my dad was that he was a very present father. Like, once he was in your presence, he made you feel like you were the most important thing in the world, right? And he was my safety. He was my protector. And now that was gone. And I'm seeing all of this chaotic police cars and policemen and women up and down my street. The media converged as well because this was such a huge story at the time. No one in the annals of LAPD had ever been assassinated at that point. And that's what this was. It was a planned out assassination of my dad.
It's just, I mean, even to think that it happened in front of your brother's school, like it's just so
Yeah.
so
And I will say
Devastating.
my brother was safe. The last thing that my dad did on this earth was to save his son and tell him to duck down in the truck. He knew what was going to happen. And so my brother was okay physically, mentally not so much, but physically he survived. He was okay. So I was grateful for that.
And what did life look like after that? Because now, you're using this tragedy to help other people. So much transformation has happened. But what did life look like soon after that, before the transformation started to happen?
Back in the 80s, there was no talk about mental health.
Yeah.
There certainly wasn't any talk outward about PTSD either. And to be honest, even LAPD really didn't have the resources for the children. They had resources to help the widow, but the kids, they really didn't have things in place for us.
But like you said, this was also the very first.
Exactly. So it was immediately after it happened, I went into a very deep depression. I was not sleeping. I would stay up all night long. And for 6 days after my dad was killed, I had this police force present in the front yard, the backyard for 6 days because they didn't catch the guys for 6 days. And so I had bodyguards, I had all these things. So really had no chance to grieve in private. There was always people in my house. So it was very difficult for me to process. And what ended up happening is the depression set in. And then I was anxious because my security was gone. And so I had panic attacks and didn't know what those were. I just knew that this is happening to me. And I didn't know. And there were times where I thought, okay, this is it. I'm going to die. And then there was the other side of that, which now I know, but it was suicidal ideation. I wanted to be with my dad and I didn't care how that happened. Right. So, trying to process this, being a kid myself and not having I didn't know how to advocate for myself. I didn't know how to be vulnerable and tell people this is what's going on with me. And nobody asked. No adults checked in with me, including my mother. So that was challenging. And it wasn't until about a month after all the craziness ended that LAPD came to my mom and said, we want to send you to therapy, all three of you, to different therapy for each. And I didn't know anything about therapy. When I thought about people seeing a psychologist or a psychiatrist, I thought they were crazy. I was a kid, And so, but I was also in a state of mind that if you pushed me in a direction, I went in that direction. And so when my mom came to me and said, you're going to therapy, I said, okay, maybe this is the adult. Maybe this is the person that's going to help me feel better. And unfortunately, the gentleman that I saw, he was not prepared to deal with the trauma. And I don't think he was trauma competent. I speak about that. And so our therapy sessions were very shallow and very generalized. It was mainly about my relationship with my mom, my brother, my boyfriend, and school. And not any time that he saw me did he ask me how that night affected me. So, and I was not able to advocate. I was not able to tell him all the things because part of me was scared. Like, if I tell him this, they're going to lock me up in a mental institution. So I stayed quiet. And every week I just kept thinking, oh, this is going to be the week. This is going to be it. He's going to help me feel better. And it didn't happen for an entire year.
Wow.
And after that year, he looked at me and he said, Susan, you're a well-rounded young lady and you're going to be fine for the rest of your life. And I don't need to see you anymore.
Oh my goodness.
I walked out of that office thinking, okay, that's it. I'm crazy. I've snapped. Not even a professional can help me. I'm going to have to figure this out on my own. And so I went into fight or flight and I adopted my mask, my emotional mask, which was when I heard people say things like, oh, you're so strong, honey. Like, you're so strong. You're so this, you're so that. I was like, oh, okay, that's the mask I'm going to wear. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
When people ask me how I am, I'm going to say, I'm fine. I'm doing great. I'm being brave. And I did that for 14 years of my life. I married the boyfriend and I had 2 kids. We decided that was at that point, I'm now, 30 years old or almost 30 years old, and I wanted to leave California. So we came to Colorado in April of 97, and I was working as a hairdresser at the time. On April 20th of 1999, I was a hairdresser in a salon that was close to Littleton, Colorado. And that day I took a break from my client and went into the back room and turned on the little TV, and all the coverage of the Columbine shootings was happening in real life. And I had a visceral reaction to it. I flashed back to the night my dad was killed. I saw the police cars, I saw the ambulances, I saw the kids that are around my same age. And as I was going through all of this and I was having a panic attack, I turned white. My colleagues looked at me like they didn't know my story. So they had no idea what was going on with me. I didn't know. Remember, I was told I was going to be fine for the rest of my life. So I didn't understand what triggers were.
Yeah.
I just knew that I was living in this nightmare again. And I thought to myself, time to put the mask on. And I did that. I put that emotional mask back on and went out and I did my client's hair the rest of the day. Everyone around me was a mess. They were angry. They were crying. They were upset. And I was like, nope, this isn't affecting me. It's not affecting me. And people would say, are you okay? And I'm like, I'm fine. I'm fine. That lovely word, fine. The minute I walked through those doors to drive home, all of it came flooding back. All of it. The suicidal ideation, the depression, the anxiety, everything came back. And for 2 days, I was spiraling. I had no idea. I was spiraling. And I did not know what to do about it. My husband told me, you have 2 choices. He met me at the door. He saw me spiraling. He knew it was a slippery slope. He says, you either get help today or I'm putting you in a hospital. And I said, okay, I put out the white flag. Because now, even though I wanted to leave this earth and stop hurting, I had 2 babies and I was a mom and I didn't want to leave my babies. And so I said, okay, I'll go get help. I went to a doctor. I went to an actual physician who put me on antidepressants because that's what they do. And then he handed me a business card and he said, I want you to make an appointment with this therapist. And I literally laughed at him in the office. I was like, wait a minute, 14 years ago, this did not do anything for me. So what makes you think this is going to help me? And he said, honestly, Susan, you have no help. You have no choice. You have no choice. You have to find someone. And I said, okay. And I made the appointment and I sat down with this woman. And I am so grateful to this day that I did that because she specialized in extreme trauma and PTSD. So as I was sitting there in the first 3 minutes of our consultation, and I told her what I had been going through since I was 17 and then currently what I was experiencing, she looked me in the face and she said, Susan, everything you have felt since you were 17 years old is absolutely normal because you have PTSD. But what you need to understand about PTSD is that it's not something that goes away. It's something you learn to manage and work through. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm not crazy. I can heal from this. Like the hope and the joy that I felt that day was incredible. And I finally had my person. I knew that she was the one that was going to help me and guide me through this because I felt like I could be vulnerable with her. And that was the most important piece of the relationship with my therapist, was the vulnerability and the ability to tell my truth and tell my story and have someone that was educated in that would understand and know what my next steps should be. And she was great about that. I think the funniest part of that was the first thing she said, "You've got a plethora of things that we've got to deal with." So, and she's like, and that's normal, but we're going to attack things one at a time. I don't want to overwhelm you. And I said, okay. And at the time she said, "What is the thing that you're struggling with the most right now?" And I said, "Sleep. I can't go to sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, I see that scene, I feel the feelings, and I get scared and I wake up. So it is sleep. I have all this stuff swirling in my head, like I go to a dark place." And so she said, "Okay, well, have you ever journaled before?" And I kind of looked at her like, "Huh?" And she said, "Well, journaling is something that is a tool, and it's not necessarily writing. I mean, it could be writing, it could be music if that's what you're into, it could be painting or drawing and art, it could be podcasts." Well, now. But what it does and what its intention is that it's allowing you to get everything that's swirling around in your head out so that it relaxes the nervous system enough where you can sleep. And I thought she was nuts. I thought, how can that really? And she's like, "Try it for a week. Just try it." And she said, "What is the..." I write. And she's like, "Great. Take a pad of paper and a pen, stick it by your nightstand, and right before you go to bed," she gave me some prompts. And then she said, "You just write. Don't worry about punctuation. Don't worry about English. Don't worry about if it doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter. You just get it out of your head." And so I thought, okay, I'll try it. I was a total skeptic. Like, this is not going to work. And I got home. I did it the first night and I got a little bit more sleep. And by the second night, I got a little bit more sleep. And by the third night, I was sleeping like a baby. And I thought, oh my gosh, this worked. What? This is crazy. And I went back the next week and she said, what happened? And I said, "It worked. I've been sleeping like a baby for the last 5 days." And she said, "Great. Keep doing it. Keep doing it." And so, I thought to myself, gosh, something that anyone can do can be so powerful in your healing. Just blew my mind. And then I was doing that for a while, and then we moved into the anxiety part. And that's when I learned breath work. We learned EFT, which is a tapping technique. And, it was all of those tools and all of those modalities that one by one were healing the things that came up for me and taught me how to regulate my nervous system, helped me grounding, taught me all of the things that I now teach other people, and help them. Because I think, and the other thing that I do say to people is that you have to pick the modality that works for you. There's so many modalities out there, cognitive therapy modalities, that you just have to pick the ones that work for you, because there's not a one size fits all. Just like medication. I am no longer on medication, have not been on medication in years. However, if it helps you, great. If it regulates you, great. Like I am not saying do not follow that. Whatever your doctors feel that is most important, whatever your decision is. But I think the first step that's really important in healing your trauma is really having the realization that you were in trauma. And that I have had many conversations with people who are walking this earth and they went through some severe childhood traumas and didn't realize that it was trauma because it was their everyday environment.
It's like you don't know any different.
Exactly. And so when I started to ask questions is when they had the self-realization that, oh my God, I did have trauma. That was trauma. And it's usually people that I have this conversation with that deal with addiction, and they've gone to rehab several times. And it's because they haven't spoke their story. They haven't told people what happened to them because they don't think that it's trauma. They don't think it's connected. Or maybe they have an idea that it might be connected because they felt so icky about themselves, right? Because that's how they've been made to feel. And once this woman who was on her way to rehab for the third time realized that what happened to her was traumatic, I told her, I said, when you go to rehab this time, I want you to tell everyone your story. You have told me, now that you've spoke the words, you can tell other people. They will get you the help. Tackle this. This is what you tackle, because this is the reason behind the addiction. And if you tackle this and you work on this specifically, sobriety will become easier to attain, because you will understand why you do the things you do, your self-sabotaging behaviors. And I mean, for me, my self-sabotaging behavior was that emotional mask.
Yeah.
Pretending that everything was okay, or that I was okay. And I was a hot mess express. Let me tell you, I just was not, everybody on the outside of me, until I wrote my book and people actually read it, they didn't realize all the things that I was feeling and the turmoil of being in fight or flight and living that way, and how it kept me from having some really great relationships in my life that I could have had stronger relationships with. But because I pushed people away and I took the burden on as myself, this is not your burden, this is mine, and I don't want to put it on you.
But you're also told by everyone, oh, you're going to be okay.
Right.
Like, you are fine. You are going to be okay. So then you feel like you expect it to be that way.
Yeah.
Especially when you're a kid, you feel like that's the persona you have to take on.
So I didn't start writing the book until I was 50 years old. And the reason behind writing the book was that I really felt like, one, that being pushed aside thing, the not feeling important. I mean, days after my dad was killed, the media didn't even realize he had a teenage daughter. So there was that.
Wow.
Being sent with a neighbor that night from my mother, there was that. My mom and I did not have a good relationship, so it was very difficult to navigate that as well. My dad was kind of that go-between, the voice of reason, and then that was gone. And so I was dealing with a narcissistic parent as well. So it was a lot of all this stuff building up. And I felt like writing the book, people could finally hear my voice and hear my story, because a lot of people that I had talked to before, they had my story in their head, right? They made up my story in their head, which a lot of the times there was a total disconnect. So it was very important for that. The other reason why I wrote the book was obviously to heal myself, but to heal people around me, help my husband, help my brother. I thought maybe in some sort of way it might help my mother. It did not. But I felt like it was important to take my journey and help people see hope, to know that there's healing, to not have the feeling that I felt at 17, where I was like, I'm broken, I'm done, there's no hope for me, right? But showing people, yes, there is. Yes, there is. Everybody's trauma is different, right? But it's their trauma. So there's no comparisons at all. Law enforcement, there was so much anger and pain. Even we're coming up on 40 years that this has happened. And people, before the book came out, they were so full of rage and hatred and sadness around my dad's death that I thought that if they read my book, then they can see some resiliency. They can see that I am healing from it and that there is a chance to do that. And it would give them permission to be like, okay, she's doing okay. I can do okay as well. So, but the message is universal, right? And so I felt like it was almost, I got to a point in my life mentally that I was okay to write this book. It took me 4.5 years to refeel, and really my intention was to grab my readers by the hand and take them on this journey. But at the same time, being their support system, having that my voice in their head saying, these are hard things to do. This is fearful stuff. I had a lot of fear writing this book, fear of my safety, fear that it would damage my marriage again, because we've been through a lot, and then ruining what was left of my mom and I's relationship, which it did, but I'm okay with it. I'm at peace. So, just when you're fearful, but you know that you're doing something good, you got to do it anyway. You got to do it anyway. You got to move through that fear. And how I did that is I found that purpose. I found the purpose that I was put on this planet to do. And that purpose was to get this message out of hope and healing. So every time I had that fear pop back up, and that self-negative talk and the, oh, maybe you should stop, maybe you should stop, maybe you shouldn't do this, I'd bulldoze through it because I would see the faceless people out there that needed to hear this message, and it just projected me forward. And that is my hope. If you have a listener out there that is just, having thoughts of want to heal, I don't know where to start to heal. Start by telling your story. Start by learning how to be vulnerable, because the vulnerability is the most powerful thing that you can do. And telling your story is taking your power back from the thing that hurt you or the person that hurt you. Because you are telling those people or that person or that thing, you can no longer hurt me. I am going to heal from this, and you no longer have control over my life.
Susan, you truly are a shining light in this world, like really sharing your story and your resilience. And just, I think you are so brave, and I'm in awe of what you've done.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for sharing your story with our listeners today. And if people want to connect with you and reach out, how can they do that?
I have a website. It's susansnowspeaks.com. It has all the information on my speaking, my coaching, and my book.
Great. And I will put all the links in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
So, Susan, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.